of legislation. In Wisconsin, where Joe is from, the governor up there did the exact same thing, but there was not a direct democracy path. This is what they're trying to do in Columbus, consolidate power. And we've got to fight that. So I'm going to turn this over to our panel. I'm going to start with David Pepper and just ask you, David, is Ohio a red state?
Okay, can everybody hear me okay?
Yep.
Okay, thank you, Dennis. It's great to be with my friends. And I agree, this guy fought one hell of a fight against Dave Yost. And he's also the guy who got Larry Householder removed from the State House. Because he wouldn't say no to that challenge. So I'm a huge fan of Jeff's. Joe and I go way, way back. Let me just say, I'm going to take this in a slightly different direction, because this is something, as party chair, you can believe you're asked this every second. Let me answer it this way, because I actually think one of our mistakes in politics right now is that we see everything as red and blue. Let me answer what Ohio is. Ohio is a state that 60% of our citizens support the right to choose. You mentioned it, Senate Bill 5, what was that, 70-30? Or something like that. So 2/3 of Ohioans support collective bargaining. If you look at polls of late, most Ohioans, a strong majority, would rather, they trust teachers to decide what's taught in classrooms more than some angry parent down the street. The polls are very clear on that. Most Ohioans support common sense gun reform. It's not even close. Most gun owners support it. You go on and on and on. Joe Biden's State of the Union. Most Ohioans would agree with almost everything he said. So the answer one is, well, of course we can be blue if Ohioans agree with us on one issue after the next. And of course, that's why I'm confident that Sherrod Brown can turn Ohio blue next year, aren't you? Because he stands for all those things. But that does beg the question, what the hell's wrong? What the hell's wrong that when Ohioans support Democrats on most issues, that we don't feel like those issues are happening? In fact, the opposite is happening. Someone just said, what word? Germany. Do you know what the problem is? And this is the fundamental question, bigger than whether red or blue, are we a democracy at all in Ohio? And I heard someone say, wow, once you ask that question, the answer is pretty clear. We're pretty much not, are we? We're pretty much not. Gerrymandering means almost every single member of the State House majority never faces a real election their entire careers. That's not a democracy. Those members violated the Ohio Constitution multiple times last year. Got away with it. That's not a democracy. That's not a rule of law. They changed the rules of how we select and elect justices of the very court that overviews and oversees their work. That's not a democracy. If the things this State House and the state were, in law after law, you mentioned the 10%, sorry, I get a little fired up. You mentioned the 10%. The young girl being sent to Indiana, less than 10% of Ohioans support no abortions, no exceptions. Extremists are running Ohio, not Ohio. So the question is, and we can spend the next hour talking about it, is we have to understand that what's happening to Ohio isn't simply a red-blue battle, or we win a lot more. And we can do better. We need to market better. We need to brand better. We need to campaign better. But to really turn Ohio around and have the results reflect Ohio, we need to get our democracy back. That's our battle. This is not some battle between red and blue. It's a battle about democracy itself. And the reason they want that constitutional change to 60% is they know that's the battle. They know in a straight-up democracy they would lose their battle over Roe v. Wade, just like they did in Kansas. So they are, Brian Stewart, is that his name? And all of them. The right wing in this State House, they know full well that on most issues, they stand with the minority. That's why they gerrymander the hell out of this state. That's why they suppress the hell out of the state. That's why they're monkeying around with the Constitution of the state. And so what we have to do to fight this is not only debate red or blue, we got to get our democracy back. And the way we do that is, and this is, I won't talk about, you'll be glad to know I'm almost done. And I do have books in the back for those who want to read more about this. Once you see that we are in a battle for democracy itself, and that's the battle, your entire game plan changes. It means you can no longer leave dozens of House districts uncontested. If the House is where they are killing democracy, we need people running in every single district holding those extremists accountable. No more uncontested districts, right? Right, yep. It also means we're in a long battle, just like the suffragists and John Lewis. We can't shut down after a November election and disappear for a year and a half. You think Steve Bannon stops? Of course not. We have to have a long game that never stops. We need to find it within everything we do, how we can fight for democracy. There's a lot more to it, but so we can be a blue state. I know we can, but we'll be a blue state once we're a democracy again, and that's the ultimate fight that we have to win. So that's my answer.
That's a great answer. Thank you, David.
So, Joe, I'm going to twist it a little bit because, Jeff, you went, I'm sorry, let's go to Jeff this time. Jeff, you went all across this state in 2022. Tell us from that perspective what you think about Ohio.
Well, first of all, the answer to the question, I think is self-evident. I wouldn't be here if I thought Ohio was a red state. I wouldn't have run for statewide office last year if I thought Ohio was a red state. Ohio can be a blue state, to David's point. And the gerrymandering does explain some of this stuff in part. But it doesn't explain all of it, right? It doesn't explain how Tim Ryan lost, or Nan Whaley lost, or the rest of our statewide candidates lost, Supreme Court candidates. There's more at play here. But let me also start off by saying, I should have started at the beginning, and say thank you for all of you for being here and being interested in doing the grassroots work that needs to get done to make sure Democrats win across the state. I recognize a lot of you here in the room today, and I can say that any success I had on the ballot last year was due to all the folks here in this room that did the hard work. Got the voters registered, got the message out, organized meetings in your communities, and it was a pleasure to do that and be on the ballot and represent all of you out there because I knew you were all working hard, and thank you. So I know we're going to continue to work hard, and that's how we're going to flip this. And there's a lot of things that are probably being discussed on how we get there because the prescription is vast, right? I mean, we have a lot of work to do. And David's a big part of that. He's been out there trying to recruit people in all 99 state house districts to make sure that we do have contested districts. And I can tell you, doing those, the bare knuckle fighting, as Leader Russo called it, in the state house every single day, it really is. I mean, you might meet those folks on the street and think they're nice folks, and they are generally decent folks, but they're never going to vote your way. You need more Democrats in the legislature. It's simple as that. So Dennis, I'm not sure if I answered your question, but I can tell you that having traveled to virtually every nook and cranny of the state last year, there is a lot of pain out there in Ohio. There is a lot of pain, and I think I talk about this story a lot because it made such an impact on me. Going to Portsmouth, Ohio. Anybody here from down that way? Portsmouth? Portsmouth, Ohio, Appalachia, epicenter of the opioid epidemic, right? Used to be a big union town, used to be a big job town, steel mills. I mean, Portsmouth is literally at the confluence of the canal and the Ohio River. For 150 some years, it's been an industrial town. And you go there and you could tell what a once mighty town it was, right? And after the parade, it was Labor Day weekend, we went there. After the parade, one of the locals showed me around town, and they were very proud of their town, as they should be. And he said, hey, he took me to an empty factory building, and he said, this is where they used to make all the world's shoelaces, right here in Portsmouth, Ohio. And there was a construction fence around, and I said, what's it getting converted to? They said, it's going to be the largest opioid treatment facility. And that, to me, says everything I need to know about what's happened here in Ohio under the Republican leadership, right? They have turned their backs on Ohio workers. They've turned their backs on people that need help in places like Portsmouth, Ohio. And it's not just Portsmouth, Ohio. I saw that in Steubenville and in Youngstown and in Dayton and Toledo and everywhere in between, Mansfields, where jobs used to be there. People could graduate from high school, walk across the street and get a job that makes the equivalent of about $100,000 a year. And there's a reason why people are pissed off, because those opportunities are gone. Their kids have moved away and they're not coming back because those opportunities don't exist. And that's what we need to address. Ohio was blue when Ohio supported its people, when Ohio supported labor, and when we marry our efforts with labor, we can achieve and stand with workers, as Tim Ryan talked about last year, as I talked about last year, we can turn this state around, because that's what the side we need to be on, is the side of the people.
Thank you, Jeff. So Joe does a lot of campaign work. I've worked with him on a number of campaigns. He is often the advisor. So he's sort of like the person that the candidate, or if it's a campaign, they go to and they ask him for a strategic plan. He brings in people. Joe has brought me in on campaigns and said, hey, I need you to do this for this particular campaign. So Joe really knows this. And Joe, I want to ask you, I just want to talk a little bit about Ohio and Michigan, because since 2016, the two states have really gone different directions. Yep. And as you know, Michigan just overturned the fact that they were a right-to-work state. In 2012, the legislature there was Republican, the governor was Republican, and on a snowy day in December when people were busy with holiday shopping, they pushed through right-to-work as wrong in one day, and put it on the books. But now that they have a Democratic legislature, Democratic governor, they've overturned that. Here's something also interesting about Michigan. Michigan has same-day voter registration. We do not. Michigan, even though they have a
ballot initiative.
And they have the ballot.
No, we got that through a ballot initiative.
Right, through a ballot, thank you. They got that through a ballot initiative, and they do have, and they've been putting ballot initiatives on that drive voters out to the polls. Michigan has a smaller population than us, but has more registered voters than us, and turns out more voters than us. So with that in mind, Joe, tell me, what does that mean to you, because you're a campaign guy?
Most recently, and I don't want to, wax intellectual on Michigan, you know a lot more than I do here in the front row, but they're virtually the same states. I've actually born in Detroit, Michigan, spent my formative childhood years there, and it's urban, it's rural, it's UAW, it's factories. My mom and dad both worked for Chrysler on Jefferson Avenue, right? And I see a lot of similarities that we can grasp. There has been a lot in terms of infrastructure that I've watched. I'll use the example of just last year, and we're catching up in Ohio, so this isn't a slight on Ohio either. But I watched the choice movement and how a lot of groups, including the parties, not only knew that the Dobbs decision was coming down, this was before it was leaked, but they could count votes, and basically the partisanship of the Supreme Court can lead you down a path. So they organized and they started collecting signatures to get on the ballot before the leaked decision had even come out. And then the leaked decision came out, and I'm talking to a close friend of ours from the We Are Ohio days, Steve Pontoni, about what's going on up there. And he said, yeah, no, we're almost to the ballot. We've been collecting signatures. Now the decision came down. We knew it was coming down. They hit the ground running right after it came down. It was on the ballot right away. It really impacted voters. If it can win in Kansas, it can win in Michigan and Ohio. I know that. I believe that. I don't know that, but I believe it, right? And so I think there's a lot. Also, I'm a huge Gretchen Whitmer fan. I think she has been doing a lot and been a driving force. Jennifer Granholm as well. There is a lot of history there that I think helped build infrastructure, helped talk to voters, hit them where they are and talk to them about what they care about. And I think that as long as we continue to go into all of the spaces that are often forgotten in election cycles, that's that continuity of organizing that I think, I'll just be honest, in some of the races I've worked in the past couple of cycles, like resources are limited, and I would watch resources on election day, GOTV weekend, get pulled out of certain spaces and sent to the 3 Cs. It's a tough decision. I've been running those campaigns where you have to make those calculated decisions. I think it's about the folks on the ground continuing to advocate for those resources in Lorain County, in Trumbull County, in Jefferson County, so that we can continue to build and not leave them behind. Because if there's continuity there, I think we build right back. Are we a blue state, red state? No, we're a slightly pink state, right? We can lose by about 7 to 8 points, or we can come right up to that line every time, and Sherrod Brown still pulls across the line, right? It's in that window. We have to convince about 4 to 5% of those voters. That's immensely doable. We can absolutely do it, and I think that's what this meeting's all about.
So I have a question. You brought up 3 things. Dave Pepper talked about gerrymandering. She mentioned ballot issue. You mentioned petitions. Tell us why, when we took around all those petitions about gerrymandering, we got the sufficient amount of signatures and we worked our asses off to get that on the ballot. What happened?
what happened?
Did everyone hear that question? I want to make sure. Okay, great.
question.
Okay.
I
Yeah,
ask it.
Come around and collect the questions.
yeah, we'd like to get your questions in, so if you have some, bring them up and we'll get them.
No.
Things were mentioned in this,
Yeah.
just this
Well,
Yeah.
so I think, if I could take this one, because I agree, I've asked that question myself. It was very loud for a while, and I'll sum this up in a minute and a half. We've talked a lot about ballot initiatives, petitions to get ballot initiatives on the ballot as our one way of having the democratic voice and the voters vote to make the decisions, usually against the Republican legislature. I agree, you worked hard to collect all those petitions. There were a lot of lawsuits, there was a lot of talk online, there was a lot of hype. I believed in it too, right? And then it kind of all just disappeared. I agree with you, I want an answer to that question, because from redistricting, at least at the state house level, and Jeff's right, there's no excuse around gerrymandering for statewide races. You either win them or you lose them. But gerrymandering is important, and it is my hope that we continue to drive towards a ballot initiative process for gerrymandering. Now, I'm all in for choice right now, this year, 100%, but you're right, that is something that we cannot get away from because they will continue to pull it away from us, hence the 60% threshold that they're trying to pass right now because they're scared of exactly that. So I agree.
You gotta do both.
Let me chime in real quick here on this too. I mean, if we do, and hopefully we do, get a ballot initiative on, again, to address this gerrymandering, it's got to have some hammer for the people that Michigan has a hammer in their law that says that if you try and gerrymander, there's criminal implications. Okay, I think I'm the only one that filed a criminal charge against the governor last year, right? And we didn't even have one prosecutor that had the balls to prosecute it. Not one. And I took it to 2 in Columbus. Okay? They had the authority, they had the legal justification, and we had the evidence in full view of the public of what they did. They completely disrespecting our Constitution and our constitutional democracy by thumbing their noses and going to federal court, and we all saw what happened. So we have to, when we put this back on the ballot, have to put provisions in there that hold people accountable for their misdeeds.
Yeah, let me add, we talked a lot while he was doing that. I mean, there's literally a statute called dereliction of duty, which is violating a responsibility that you shoulder as a state rep, and they clearly violated that. There's a long story about that. I mean, I think there was a decision made that because the other side would spend millions to defeat it, you were better off trying to accomplish something that Republicans also endorsed. That led to a 70% passage. The real problem here is they just broke the law. And I will say, and I'm a big fan of our justices, I think the justices should have been tougher on them when they broke the law. These guys only respond to, you watch Donald Trump right now, to real accountability. But the one thing I disagree with Jeff and Joe on a little bit, and I know you're not really saying it this way, but long term, you bet it impacts every statewide race when you gerrymander. Because it's the gerrymandered legislature that passes the voter ID, which suppresses the vote. If we have the turnout of cities that we had in 22 and 24, we're never winning anything again. And a lot of that is coming because of nonstop purging and nonstop suppression by people who feel unaccountable, and oftentimes boss Mike DeWine and Frank LaRose around because they keep you held accountable. So I agree that there are other things we have to improve statewide, but the gerrymandering poisons all of it. And one other thing I want to say on what Jeff said, and Allison talked about it in her speech. One opportunity that they are giving us that we have to take better advantage of, with the lack of accountability these goofballs in Columbus face. Literally, think about it. Not one of them, if you go through the numbers, almost not a single one of them ever faces a real election the rest of their lives. They feel no accountability to the public for what they do. They can deliver the worst schools and lower wages, shut that factory down, and no one can get rid of them. But they get ahead by giving money to First Energy and ECOT and everyone else who wants money. So if you hear that set of incentives they face, inevitably tied to these broken and corrupt legislatures, are horrific public outcomes. Downward spirals. You know, Ohio, we were ranked 5th in schools 12 years ago. We're now in the mid-20s. We have the highest student debt in the country in Ohio. We have towns dying. Why is there a Democratic governor in the state of Kansas? Because she ran on all the failures of Sam Brownback. We have to do a better job in Ohio of showing the people of Ohio, are you tired of failure here and there and here? Because it's automatically a result of the corruption that we're seeing, and that's how you go out and win elections and win back over people we've been losing. It's literally all around us, that failure. And sometimes when you get too caught up in the corruption stuff, you never explain to people like Gretchen Whitmer did by saying the roads need to be damn fixed, however she said it. They fix the damn roads. You have to point out how the corruption is undermining the lives of everyone who lives here. And that case is so clear to be made here in Ohio.
And there's going to be plenty of opportunities for more corruption cases to be brought against the Republicans in Columbus because they've done nothing to fix the problems that resulted in the corruption, despite Democratic efforts to reform the process, despite Democratic efforts to reform campaign finance, despite Democratic efforts to add more transparency and put limits and structure around what they're doing so that special interests have a diluted effect. Despite all of this effort, nothing has changed fundamentally in the environment. Not one First Energy executive has gone to prison either or has faced any real significant accountability. And when you have people wearing $1,000 suits that have had no accountability until they're in orange jumpsuits, you're going to have dim-witted Republican legislators that control the State House that are willing to take gobs of cash thrown at them by these people.
David, talked about this. He talked about how gerrymandering does hurt us statewide. Someone is asking, what happened to our statewide candidates last year? They're saying we can't blame gerrymandering.
Yeah, you heard me say, I think I'm not blaming gerrymandering on an individual result, but long term. The gerrymandered legislature of Ohio destroyed the Obama coalition over the last 12 years intentionally. Purging, suppression, early vote, now it's 1 drop box per county. You bet that has a long-term impact on your statewide races. So, as Joe said, it's a really close margin. And if you've gutted the Obama coalition, elected Obama, and it's half the size of what it was in certain places like Cleveland, let's just put it this way, it's a lot harder to win.
Yes.
And so there is some impact. That doesn't explain it all. And again, when Jeff and I talked about him running, I said, Jeff, this may be a tough year. It was clear as we tough. I think a couple things happened last year just to get to the raw politics of it. The turnout in our cities was abysmally low. We cannot win with the turnout that we had in Cleveland, Columbus, Dayton, Youngstown. Cincinnati and Akron were a little bit higher because we had competitive congressional races in the DSCC. They weren't as high as they need to be, but that helped Greg Landsman and Amelia Sykes win. But we have a major problem right now, and it's going to be, this is when I talk about battling for democracy. We have to find, not just in the last couple weeks of door knocking, but right now, organizations that go to all these purged and unengaged voters that aren't showing up and engage them now, all the way through next year, or we are not going to win. And Sherrod Brown needs to sort of call out loudly for that to happen, because he'll struggle to win if we don't get that urban turnout up.
There's a direct connection between turnout and whether people feel like their vote matters.
Correct.
You are understating the power of that.
Yes. And the point is that and Stacey Abrams talks about this, when you show up with weeks to go and it's like a frantic reminder. If someone's decided before that their vote doesn't matter, knocking on their door saying, don't forget to vote, you're not changing their underlying conclusion that the vote won't change their life. So we have, and I'm trying to work with Justin Bibb on this and have to have Purval, we have to have community groups long before the campaigns show up do the ongoing engagement to people who are no longer part of Ohio's democracy. And that's why I say we have to view it as a battle over democracy and not just over sort of the normal political cycle. The other thing I'd say, the question, so we've got to get the turnout up. Let's be very clear. Mike DeWine, as much as we all know how conservative he is, when he stood with Amy Acton for about 10 weeks, he won over a lot of Ohio. And that was the last impression that most people not paying a lot of attention had. Oh, hey, he was trying to help. And that's why you see his numbers in suburbs, like, he won Hamilton County. That should not happen. But it's because he won over swing suburbs that J.D. Vance didn't come close to winning. And that ended up, you guys everyone did better as you went down the ballot. But that DeWine number on the top where we had low urban turnout, and he won over moderate voters because they were thanking and remembering he and Dr. Acton working together, and they didn't get told enough to change that narrative. All of a sudden, he puts up a big number, and everyone else pays the price for that. But by the way, the one thing I'd say about 2022 that's a positive, and I'm like Jeff, I wouldn't be here if I were an optimist. Look at the difference between Mike DeWine's result and J.D. Vance. Mike DeWine, it was a false narrative. Mike DeWine's no moderate, okay? But he felt like a moderate. You probably heard a lot of friends of yours say, oh, I kind of like that guy, right? And we would all argue and we wouldn't win. J.D. Vance was not a moderate. How much did he win by? 6. What is the future of the Republican Party in Ohio? Is it Mike DeWine moderation or J.D. Vance? Just watch Frank LaRose for your answer. It's J.D. Vance. So the good news long term is they are, if you were rational and you were a Republican, you'd say, well, don't we want to do like the guy who did better than the guy who literally underperformed by 20 points, the top of the ticket? So the other opportunity, besides their indefensibly horrific public outcomes, is the fact that they are choosing a brand that does far less well in Ohio, winning by 6, versus the brand, sort of a moderate, nice old grandfather-like figure who did 25. So there's a lot of reasons for 22. I think the DeWine number was very clearly driving a lot of it. And our urban turnout, and by the way, I say this also, I agree with Joe, we've got to get our numbers up everywhere. If you run up big numbers in urban Ohio, but you're losing rural and small-town Ohio 70-30 or worse, which is happening all over, you also cannot win Ohio. So we have to do it all in Ohio.
I want to add 2 points to what David said, and just from my experience as a reporter. In 2008, I was still a reporter when Barack Obama ran for president. And one of the stories that I was doing frequently was I was going out to local boards of elections and just standing there as people were coming in and registering for the first time. A lot of black voters registering for the first time. And I would ask them, why are you here? Why are you registering, et cetera? And it was Obama driving them to the polls. Well, that year, we had a record historical turnout of voters for the Democratic Party. The House, the gerrymandered Ohio House, picked up seats. And then 2 years later, that same House became Democratic with gerrymandered seats. So there is proof that if we turn out voters, we're not a red state. Because Obama turned out voters, but then built the base. And David mentioned they have spent 12 years taking, a pickaxe to that base and breaking it apart and suppressing it. The other thing I want to say to you is that David also mentioned 2 races where there were competitive congressional races in Akron and Cincinnati. Those places, the Democratic base turned out because they had a reason to vote. There's the other thing that happens with gerrymandering. If you don't have a choice, if you don't have a chance, you stay home. I want to say one more thing about negative advertising. I want to go to Joe on this. There's a guy named Mark Weaver who is a Republican sort of does what I do on this side. I do messaging and communications, and he does that. And when I was a reporter still, I asked him one time, Mark, why do you guys go negative, meaning Republicans? He answered this way. He said, we go negative, they stay home, Democrats, we win. And so with that in mind, what is the difference between like the fear and scare tactics, Joe, and the aspirational message we have to have?
So aspirational is a hard note to hit, right? It is, Barack Obama, still in my eyes, was a once-in-a-generation talent at that, and he hit that spot. They have it easier. I think Jim Purvis said at the beginning, kicking this off, is their job is to gum up the works. 50% is the stop line. If they can stop that, they can stop it all. So they go with fear and anger, and it works. It confuses people, it makes them stay home, or it makes them angry and it makes them vote against us. But if we can find a way to be inspirational, I think John McCain's an American hero. I've read his book. 2000 might have been about the last time I even considered, maybe as a 19-year-old, could I vote for John McCain? He seems like an honorable human. But Barack Obama was so good in that moment that there was nothing that was stopping that freight train, right? But that's the hard spot for Democrats, is we don't do fear and anger like they do. We do aspiration. and building a vision of what we can bring to people, it's a much harder thing to do, right? And so I guess that's kind of why we're here, because if you hit that note, ain't nobody stopping you.
And I have a question from the audience. I'm going to direct this to Jeff because you were in 88 counties last year. Rural Ohioans feel completely isolated, and how do we rebuild the rural Democratic Party?
It's a great question, and I think once if I figured out the full solution, I think I'd probably be worth more than I am now. It is a challenge. I think we have to start performing better in every single county. We can't, just let Republicans win counties, with 80-20 and think we're going to, make up the difference in some of the bigger counties. It's just not going to work mathematically. And I think if you look at years that Democrats have won statewide, we've done really well, relatively speaking, in rural areas. I think Democrats have to go everywhere. I really made an effort last year to get not just to the county parties, but to the American Legion halls, to the chambers of commerce in all these counties, and to the Farm Bureau meetings, because that's where you meet folks in rural counties, and talk to rural voters and find out where they meet people and talk to them where they're at. We have to support our rural counties. We have to help them, organize. We have to help them message and give them whatever the resources they need to make sure that they can find the folks that are like them in their counties and support their candidates. And this is work that isn't done in state election years. It's done every year. I mean, there's elections going on this year, right? There's village elections, there's township elections. Those are the elections where a lot of times a Democrat can get elected because those are nonpartisan races. And that's where you build your bench strength from. That's what you take when you take a township trustee and you run them for state representative. They have a built-in audience that they've already, a community of people that they've already interacted with, and people know their brand, right? And whether they're running as an independent or a Democrat, by then people know who they are. So I think these are the strategies. I think meetings like this are helpful because you start to think about the stuff in a more strategic way, and that's what a lot of the cities have been doing. A lot of in Cuyahoga County, where I'm from, a lot of the cities that have flipped from red to blue, they took that long-term approach. They ran people for city council or school board, and then they worked their way up to mayor, and finally they're flipping cities blue.
Can I jump in on that real quick?
Of course.
The other one is, there are a lot of counties represented here today. Let's all commit that in all the counties we represent, there will not be an uncontested state house race next year. Right now. Let's commit to that. Michigan didn't have a single uncontested race last year. Now, they had a better map because of gerrymandering reform as well, but that matters. So, and this goes to the rural question.
We do, though.
Pardon me?
At the township level, we do, but not at the house.
Right. But to go to Jeff's question, the best way to be in rural Ohio is to have someone locally who's known running in that district. And when you have 10 or 20 or 30, this is a national problem. 40 didn't run in Georgia last year when they were all that was at stake. 50 in Texas. You are literally leaving, poor Tim Ryan or Dan Whaler, to run a field operation when it'd be much better if a state rep were knocking on doors every day as the neighbor, as the former teacher, the police chief. So running everywhere, even in a gerrymandered world, is so much better than conceding 20 or 30 districts by not running. And if you add up those 20 or 30 districts that you leave uncontested, that's millions of Ohioans that will therefore not have a candidate knocking on doors. So I think a lot of it's supporting the party. And one other piece of this. When someone is running in a hard district, and I know Leader Rousseau thinks this, and we're working together on this kind of thing through this Blue Ohio thing I've started. Don't walk away from the candidate in the tough district. Oh my gosh, you may not win. I'm not going to answer your call. Actually, thank them louder.
Yeah.
In a world where democracy is being attacked, they are doing a great service by running alone, even if they never win. And we should thank them and support them because they're helping fix this broader problem that a whole lot of extremists like Brian Stewart run without opposition, which only makes their extremism worse. So really recruit and then support and celebrate people running. And if they never win, they were already performing service for every single day of their campaign.
And then we should also take gerrymandering to the ballot so we don't have to wait till June in the on year to finally tell our candidates which districts they're running in. Because I'm going to tell you something right now, and I give Leader Russo and Leader Sykes at the time, Jordan Hawkins, a lot of credit. They were the statewide field apparatus. The state house candidates were the statewide field apparatus throughout this state until I would say mid-August. Tim Ryan, you build a field program. Eventually Tim Ryan and ODP was going to surpass. But for the first 3-4 months, knocking all those doors, I was working with them. It was Jordan Hawkins, making sure all those candidates all over the state reported back about doors knocked, conversations had. And when we can't start doing that till June because we don't know where to go, that hurt us a lot. We're facing it again. I was just telling Representative Miller, I hope we have this figured out by July, August, September this year. Fingers crossed, we're going to recruit everywhere. And that also means we, myself, Jordan Hawkins, Simon Dallas with the Senate Democrats, are going to be coming around talking to people, be saying, we need you to be considering this. We don't know how it's going to end up yet, but we want you on the line. You're involved. You know how to do this. And that's how we can test every race, right?
I also want to add one more thing. I would not be shy about, if you're from a rural county, contacting Democratic state representatives or state senators, even if you're not your state representative or state senator. We desperately want to hear from rural counties. We want to understand what your concerns are. We want to know how we can meet your needs as a legislator. When I was in the legislature, I very infrequently ever heard from anybody outside my county. That doesn't mean you can't contact us. And you need those relationships too, because you want to invite them out to your areas and drive attendance to your meetings and have people hear from Democrats what they're working on their behalf, or even independents that you're able to get to come to your meetings as Democrats and listen to what Democrats are doing on their behalf in the legislature.
We have about 5 minutes left. I want to say Brian Stewart is going to have a candidate against him, a guy named Dr. Brad Cotton, the chair, the Pickaway County Democratic Party chair, and I met with Brad Cotton this week, and we're going to start hitting Brian Stewart this year. We're going to start hitting him this year. He's the guy who is the sponsor of House Joint Resolution 1. And the way you know that he's lying is his lips are moving. He's that bad of a person. We have about 3 minutes left. I'm going to give each person up here, and thank you for your questions. I'm sorry if I didn't get to them. It's been a great, robust conversation. But I'm going to start with Joe, come to Jeff, and then David for just your final comments.
I think it's been hard. I think the Republicans have tried to stack the deck against us for the last decade, as David referenced. But I also see movement. It's retreats like this that help us turn Ohio as a pink state back into a blue state. It's a dogfight. It's 3 yards in a cloud of dust, and it's all you in this room. I work with a lot of you. I need your help. One of the things I always tell people is, you're running for office, I'll tell you strategy, I'll write you a budget, I'll teach you how to fundraise. You know your local politics and your local message better than anybody. We need you to tell us what people are saying on the ground. That builds strength, that helps unify a message. It helps make everybody feel like they're a part of something. And so just take that with you. Don't give up, we keep fighting. We've got a great leader in Sherrod Brown at the top of the ticket this year, Joe Biden too. That man has been the most effective president legislatively in maybe since LBJ, if I had to peg it, right? Be proud of that. Let's talk about it. Let's learn how to talk about it, right? And so,
At least he didn't say Woodrow Wilson.
yeah. Well, I mean, if you're talking about passing legislation as opposed to like, oh, did you stutter or are you old? He's been no doubt about it, and get used to repeating that.
Jeff?
Well, I'll say that I am optimistic, just to reiterate that. We have a lot of political talent in this state. I know that because I did have the pleasure and honor of serving in the legislature with some really talented Democrats, and so we have a good bench. We do. We have a lot of good. County commissioners and other folks around the state. There's good political talent here. We have good political leadership in this state. With all of you here in this room, that proves the point, right? You're all here, and they said showing up is half the battle. Now we just got to get our ducks in a row here, and I think we can do that. I think having these kind of things a year and a half out from a really major statewide election next year, national election, is a good sign. And we all have to roll up our sleeves and get the job done and look at this as a constant enterprise rather than just a once every 4 years enterprise.
Okay, I'll just simply close by going back to where I started. We are in a battle for democracy itself. That's our battle. And to go back to some of what was said, why are they battling democracy? Because they are in the minority and they know it. They know that a straight-up election on 10-year-old rape victims going to Indiana, or crazy gun laws, or trickle-down economics, or attacking public schools, they know they would lose that election. So their goal in life is to figure out how to rig the system enough to lock in a minority worldview that would lose even in Kansas if there was a straight-up referendum on it. And we have to keep that in mind in everything we do. And the most, hopefully, it's sobering to realize we're in the same battle that John Lewis and the suffragists were in. But John Lewis would say, well, what the hell did you think you were in? Democracy doesn't just sit here automatically. You got to fight for it. That's been our whole history. And the conclusion, though, I hope you reach is, you're on the front lines, every single one of you, of that battle for democracy.
Yep.
Every state rep you recruit, every new voter you register, all of that is to the good for democracy. And the one thing I'll close in saying is, they have one problem right now. Remember, they're in the minority. When Lindsey Graham wanted to ban abortion, what did Mitch McConnell tell him last year? Don't bring it up. They know what had happened when Joe Biden brought up Social Security. They shouted him down. They know their agenda is really unpopular. They know their extremism is unpopular. And here's the very good news to go to some optimism. They can't hide it anymore. The face of their party is Marjorie Taylor Greene. The face of their party is Donald Trump being indicted, and every single one of them publicly supporting him. So for the next year and a half, we can put points on the board and solve the real issues of everyday people in states, while despite Mitch McConnell's best efforts. Look at Ron DeSantis, what he's doing. That's the they're going to be having a battle in that primary of how crazy they are, and Marjorie Taylor Greene's going to be the face. So they are in crazy land, and if we do our job of engaging everywhere and putting points on the board on the issues people care about, and if we're smarter than we've been in the past, where we take all that and have it benefit at all levels, starting with State House. And by the way, we can win back the Ohio Supreme Court next year. Don't let the results last year fool you. Zayas and Jameson, if they had overperformed the top of the ticket as they did last year in the 18 year, they would have won. So if Sherrod Brown is close and we overperform again, we can win. So we have to take all the reasons to be optimistic, but make sure we're fighting at all levels of these races, including all these offices that are truly the front line of democracy, including State House and those Ohio Supreme Court races. We can get it done, and next year, honestly, could be a perfect moment where we can win up and down that ballot.
Let's have a round of applause for David, Jeff, and Joe.
And thank you so much.
Thank you.